What's up, y'all? Bill Cammack. This is video number 2 of Anatomy of a Mix. This time we're going to talk about balance, panning, and gain staging. So I added a bunch of plugins here, which I really don't need because the individual tracks were recorded well enough sonically. But I wanted to try something out that was brought up in a conversation on the Pensados students group by Daniel Ford, which was that in an analog studio, the order is mic to mic pre, to recording console, to tape deck, to mixing console, to fader. So I decided to create a chain similar to that and see what happens. Also, we're going to see what happens with the CPU right here. You see my core is working here, and here's what's happening with the disk. So if we press play here, so you can see the computer isn't working very hard yet. Since these are gray, that means they're bypassed. They're not taking up computer processing. All this stuff is bypassed. This, which I'll get to in a second, is not bypassed according to the DAW, but it is bypassed inside the plugin. I basically have 3 chains here. One for the individual channels, one for the submix buses, and one for the output channel. As I mentioned in the last video, these on the left here go into one of these, and then these go into this. So if I double click here for vocals, it goes over here to the vocal harmonies bus. If I click here, it goes to the stereo out. Same thing here. Guitars, double click, takes you to your guitar bus. Guitar bus, double click, goes to your stereo out. So as far as these faders, this is the first level of volume coming in. This is the second set of volume levels, and this is the final volume level. So it goes through here, into here. The plugins I used on the last video were multimeter, VUMT, which I had at minus 12.3 dB because I have all of these on Unity. And BPM counter, which right now says nothing, but what you want to do with BPM counter is get it to figure out how many beats per minute the song is playing and then input it up here. You're going to want to do that with drums, so I'll start out here and we'll see what BPM counter tells us. So there you go, you get your 78.7, round it off to 79. You don't have to round it off. I decided to because this is not electronic music, so that's not going to be a steady number anyway. So then once you have your 79, you can basically do a loop. Actually, let's go over here. That's the first point of setting up your BPM, and the second point is when you use time-based effects, they're going to go by 1/4, 1/8, etc., and you want them to have the correct time. The other issue is that, like I said, that time is not consistent. So You don't have to stick with exact multiples with reverbs and delays. You can change them by millisecond, so if it sounds better off the beat, that's where you put it. So that's all I need BPM counter for. We're going to bypass this, which means it grays out here. This is the same as doing this. Next we're up to balancing, and you can't balance a song without balanced tracks. What I mean by that is, if we look at these actual tracks and how they were recorded, we got the drums up here. Again, like I said in the previous video, green is drums, red is bass, aqua is acoustic guitar, blue is electric guitar, brown is synths, bright yellow is lead vox, and yellow is background vocals. So if we look at these, I think I'll expand a little more. So if we look at these, the kick drum, the height of each of these is the volume or amplitude. So the volume on this kick is going up and down and up and down, not balanced. This is going up and down, not balanced. This is up, down, not balanced. This is pretty even. Snare top, snare bottom, again, from here to here, all over the place. Ride is going to look a little different because there are only certain times that the ride is actually playing. So the rest of the time, you're hearing feedback from the rest of the kit. If we solo this, see, we're not listening to any cymbals here at all. That was actually a snare hit right there. That was a tom roll. More toms in front of the snare. So, since this is a live kit, there's a lot of bleed going on. You can either attempt to cut all this out and just leave the ride hits, or you can leave it as is and deal with the bleed. But anyway, that's why this looks like it is. It's not ride hits that are low and ride hits that are high. It's bleed from the kit that's low and then ride hits that are high. Hi-hat all over the place here. Floor toms. A lot of the times I clean up toms. A lot of times I'll take everything out other than the tom hits. But floor tom, again, if we look at this on zoom, you see a lot of different volumes there. Rack tom. Overheads, you might want to be kind of dynamic because it's the entire kit that you're listening to here. That was interesting. There's your overhead center, overhead left. Your rooms, those are going to get compressed anyway. Tambourine, up and down, up and down. Bass. At some points the bass sounds like this. Whoops, solo. And then sometimes it sounds like this. So you're going to want to regulate those volumes. Same thing with the bass amp. Acoustic guitar. Sometimes it sounds like this. And you can even see the volume levels over here. And then it sounds like this. Now sometimes fluctuations like that are expressiveness of playing what you want to keep in the song, and sometimes it's stuff that you don't want to keep, so you're going to want to compress that out of there. Electric guitars. So with these, depending on what it sounds like, you're either going to want to compress this stuff to get it back to the same levels, or you're going to want to use fader moves to change the volume when it gets to these different levels. Rhythm guitars. Synthesizers. Vocals and background vocals. Background vocals pretty even there. Vocals all over the place.
Love in branches isn't enough. Our love is killing us. It's killing us. We can't be friends. I'm not strong enough to let you go.
See what I mean? It's all over the place. So if you try to balance a song with unbalanced tracks, you might balance it for a vocal that's this loud, and then you move over to this section and the vocal isn't that loud anymore, and now you don't have any balance. So I decided that for the input channels, the first insert was going to be a compressor, which is the TDR feedback compressor, which is free from Tokyo Dawn Labs. The second element representing our recording console is going to be sats and channel. That's plus or minus 18 gain, high pass and low pass filters. Next, for the tape deck, we're going with Slate VTM. We're going with 16 track, 456 tape. Normal bias 30 IPS to begin with. Some of them might get switched to 15. In the settings, most likely this base alignment is going to come down somewhere around here. And for the recording console, we're using SK-Note strip bus, which, as I said, right now is bypassed. It's using dynamic EQ in the highs, the mids, and the lows. The noise is off, the crosstalk is off for now. I'm going to be using medium crosstalk. Crosstalk meaning, let's say I'm playing this bass channel. Alright, you just heard bass because that's all that's on there. It's a computer file. It has bass on it. There's nothing else on it. So then, we turn the console on. You just hear bass because it's a computer file. There's only bass on it. So what strip bus does is all the instances speak to each other and give each other information. So what crosstalk does, which is something you'd probably ask, why would you want to do this, is it creates bleed. Like we were listening to bleed earlier on the cymbal track. You could hear the rest of the drum kit on the cymbal track. So now, if we turn the crosstalk on, we're going to put it on medium. Now you won't hear just bass in the bass track. So that's our input channel chain, which is compressor to even things out, recording console, Satsin, tape deck VTM, mixing console strip bus. For the submix buses, the chain is VUMT, which is the VU meter, and it's also a gain plugin, which you can either use in left-right mode or mid-side mode, and change the volume of what's passing through VUMT. You can also change the calibration here, so -18, -24, +6. The settings on VUMT, this dot right here will light up yellow if you reach -6 dBFS, and this will light up red if you make -0.2 dBFS. So mainly you either want to see nothing here or yellow. Next up is Satsin bus. Set up on modern crosstalk, not vintage. Next up is VBC rack. which has 3 compressors in it: FG Gray, an SSL emulation, FG Red, a Focusrite emulation, and FGMU, which is supposed to be a hybrid between a Fairchild and a Varimu. You don't have to use all of them. You can use any of them or none of them. You can also change the order, but I tend to find this order pretty useful. Finally, on the Submix buses, we have Vlad G's limiter number 6. This is going to handle all of our peaks and make sure none of these Submix buses get louder than we want them to. We have a compressor, then a peak limiter, high frequency limiter, which I don't really use, a clipper if you want it, and protection. So that's the Submix bus chain. The output or 2-bus chain is VUMT again, which, as I said before, we had this on -12.3 because all the faders are on Unity. We're going to switch that. Next up is another instance of TDR feedback compressor. I'm going to put this on a 1.1 to 1 ratio, really low ratio, because we already have everything controlled in our Submix buses. This is really just to make sure everything's working well together. It's not really to compress anything. Next is Slate VTM on 2-track instead of 16, and on FG9 instead of FG456. It'll probably stay on 30 IPS, normal bias. The settings at this point for Slate VTM are global, so any adjustments I make here on the 2-bus are also made on all the other VTM instances. So that's something you're going to want to think about, whether you want to align this early or set up your channels through it and then deal with the extra bass later on down the line. Once again, we have the Vlad G limiter number 6, locking everything down, and behind all of that we have our multimeter, which is showing us what's going on with our channel. In video 2 part B, we'll get to the actual balancing, panning, and gain staging. Bill Cammack, I'm out.